In this video, we'll create a transparent login form with HTML5, CSS3, and Bootstrap 4. Okay guys, so let's check out our login form here before we get started. So at the top we have the user image with the turquoise background, then we have our input fields underneath it with our icons to the left for the enter username field and the enter password field. So when we enter characters into this password input section, it's going to be encrypted, as you can see, and then underneath that we have our login button followed by the forgot password link. At full width, the login form will take up 2/3 of the screen, and once we get down to 576 pixels, or the small screen with Bootstrap, it's going to turn into a single column full width login form. Alright, so let's take a look at what we need to get started with the tutorial. So in the description of this video will be the free download for the HTML and CSS login form starter files, including index.html and style.css. I'm going to be using the free program called Sublime Text as my text editor, and then I'm also going to have it open with Google Chrome while we're editing it. Also included in the starter files is the face image for the user image at the top of the login form, as well as the mountain background image. Let's move over to Sublime Text and see what's already included in the starter files. So in style.css we have a Google font here imported that we'll be using, and then in index.html we have our title up here, followed by the latest version of Bootstrap.cs, or CSS rather, with Bootstrap 4. Then we have the latest version of jQuery and Popper.js, which is recommended for Bootstrap, followed by Bootstrap 4's JS file. And then we have the solid version of the latest version of Font Awesome here with the CSS file, which we'll use to create these icons inside of our input sections. Then we have the JS version of Font Awesome, which we'll use to create the icon in the login button there. Alright, so lastly we have the link to style.css here for our style sheet. And let's go ahead and just flex this down a little bit, and then I'm just going to make sure that I'm connected to Google Chrome with some dummy text here, and we can get started with our first tag. So let's go ahead and start off with a div class for a modal, which will display on top of our background image without using any z-index. So we'll say div class modal-dialog, and then we'll also create a text center class because all of our text is centered here other than our input placeholder text. And then inside of that we'll have our Bootstrap column. So we'll say div class col-sm-8. So it's going to take up 2/3 of the screen above 576 pixels with the sm small screen class there. And for styling purposes, we'll give this another class and we'll just call it main-section so we can reference it later and add our background color to our form. Okay, then inside of that we'll have another modal class for our actual content here. So we'll say div class modal-content. And after the closing div for modal-content, I'm just going to write a invisible HTML comment saying this is the end of modal content. So basically we know that all of our form content will be inside of this. So let's start off with our user image up here, and that's going to take up 100% of our form. So we'll use the div class col-12 for all 12 columns inside of our main section here. And then we'll just say user-image so we can add some additional styling to the image that we're going to add. So let's go ahead and add that with image source img/, and it's going to be face.png. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, there we have our user image inside of our form border that's been started for us already with modal content. So let's drop down to our input sections next. So we'll start our actual form tag. So we'll say form col-12 as our class. And then inside of that, we'll have a form group for each input section. So we'll say div class form-group. And then you can close out your div. And inside of that, we'll have our input tag. So input type text, or you can do type email if you want it to be an email field here. And then class form-control. And then for the placeholder text, you can add what you want, but I'm just going to leave it the same as the original with enter user name. Okay, and this is going to be basically the same class and input for the password section. So to save us some time, we can just copy this and paste it. And then all we need to change is the type to password from text, and then the placeholder text here to password from username. So now if we go and refresh Google Chrome, there we have our two input sections done for us already with our placeholder text. So let's drop down to our login button next. So we'll start it off with a button tag, and then inside of our button, we'll add our font awesome icon for the little arrow there off to the left of the login text with iClass FAS FA-sign -in-alt. And then you can close out the I tag and write login here in between the I and the closing button tag. So then we'll give it a type and we'll just say submit and then class btn. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, there we have the start of our button. Okay, so lastly, let's go ahead and just add the forgot password link down here. So to add that, we'll drop down underneath our form tag and we'll say div class col-12, and then we'll just give it a class called forgot and close out the div, and inside of that we'll add our link. So I'll just leave it blank with a hashtag and then forgot password ? Okay, so there we have the all of our HTML laid out for our form. So let's move over to style.css. So the first thing that we're going to add is what some may call a reset style. So we're going to go ahead and reference the body of our HTML document itself with body, and then inside of our swirly brackets, let's change our font family to the imported Google font Roboto, and that's a sans serif font. So now if we go and refresh in Google Chrome, it's going to change the font to be a little bit more compacted, but still pretty rounded with the sans serif feel. Let's add our background image next. So we'll say background URL, and then in parentheses we'll have our image here in the image folder, which is mountain.jpg, and then we'll say no repeat, center fixed. Okay, so now if we go and refresh in Google Chrome, there we have our background image, but we're not seeing all of the image. So let's say background size cover. And now if we refresh, we have it looking like the original here. Okay, so let's move on to our main section here for our form. So we'll reference the main section class here. So .main-section, and then let's center it with margin 0 auto. Okay, and then let's push it off from the top a bit with margin top 130 pixels. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Next, let's take away the inherent padding and just say padding 0, which will widen it a little bit here. Okay, so that looks good. And then next, let's move on to our modal content section here, so we can add our background color to the white form background here. So we'll say .modal-content, and then background color, which is hashtag 3B4652 as our hex color value. So that looks pretty good. And then let's add some opacity to it. So I'll say opacity 0.95 to make it transparent. And you can mess around with the opacity to make it more transparent if you want. And then let's add some padding off to the sides so our input fields don't take up so much space. So we'll say padding 0 top bottom, 18 pixels left right. And there we go. Okay, and next, it may be hard to tell, but there's a little bit of a box shadow around the form off to the side here to make it sort of stick out a little bit and make it kind of 3D rather than flat. So we'll say box shadow 0 pixels horizontal and vertical, and then we'll give it a width of 3 pixels with the color 848484, which is sort of a dark gray shade. Okay, so there we have it, looking a little more 3D and less flat. So next, let's move on to our user image. So we'll go ahead and reference the user-image class here. So we'll say .user-image, and then the original with the image, it sticks out of the top a bit. So we'll say margin top -50 pixels. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, there we have it sticking out of the top a bit. And then let's add some space underneath it also before we get to the input sections. So we'll say margin bottom 35 pixels. Okay, so our spacing looks good, but let's make our actual image smaller and we'll round the corners off. So we'll say user-image image, and then we'll give it a height and width of 100 pixels, so half of it at 50 pixels is sticking out of the top. So that looks good. And then let's add some border radius to round the corners. So we'll say border radius 5 pixels. Okay, and the original also has a box shadow. So I'll just go ahead and take the box shadow from the modal content class and paste it in here. And then let's change this to 2 pixels from 3. Okay, so that looks good. So next, let's move on to our input sections and add a little bit of space so they're not so close together. So let's reference the form group class here, because each input section is inside of the form group class. So we'll say .form group margin bottom 25 pixels. So that'll create some space in between the input sections and the button. Okay. Alright, so let's move on to our actual input next. So we'll say .form group dash, or rather space input, and then let's change the height to 42 pixels to make them a little taller. And then let's have our border radius match the image that we added. So we'll say border radius 5 pixels. Okay. And then let's take away the border that's added to it inherently. So border 0. Okay. And then let's change the font size here for our placeholder text. So we'll say font size 18 pixels, which is, I guess, 2 pixels larger than the regular Google font size. And next, let's move on to our icons here to the left of our placeholder text. Okay, so we'll want to reference the form group again. So we'll say .form-group : before. Okay, and then we'll reference the Font Awesome font family. So font family, it's going to be Font Awesome version 5, and it's the free version. So we'll say Font Awesome \5 free. Okay, and then for our icon, we'll write content, and we'll need to get the Font Awesome Unicode for the user icon here. So let's go over to Font Awesome icons, and we'll just do a search for user. Okay, so here is our user icon. And then we'll drop down and get the Unicode, which is right here, and that's F007. Okay, so in content, we'll use \F007. And now if we refresh, here we have our icon. So to get it inside of the actual input section, we'll use position absolute. And then let's change the font size to 22 pixels. Okay, and let's change the color. It's going to be the same gray shade as the user image hair up here, which is that gray color. So we'll say color hex value 555E60. Okay, so that looks good. And then let's push it off to the left. So we'll say left 28 pixels. So it's going to be 28 pixels from the very left of our modal content. And then let's add some padding to the top to center it with padding top 4 pixels. Okay, and then we'll just need to push our placeholder text over to the right. So let's say padding left 54 pixels. Okay. Alright, so that's looking just like the original until we get to the lock symbol. So let's go back over to Font Awesome and get the Unicode for the lock. Okay, so here it is. And it's F023. So we'll want to reference the form group again, but it's going to be the second of the form group classes and the last for that matter. So we'll say form group : last of type, and then : before. And all we need to change is the icon content. So content, and then we'll use that Unicode \F023. Okay, so there we have our lock, and that's looking good. And next we can move on to our button. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll want to reference the actual button tag. So we'll give it a width of 40% to match the width of the original. And then let's add some margin to the top and bottom. So we'll say margin 5 pixels top, 0 left right, and 25 pixels bottom. Okay. So next, let's move on to our actual button class, which is btn. So we'll say .btn, and let's change the background color to hex value 27C2A5, which is the same as the light turquoise in the user image. Okay, and then let's change the color of our icon and login text to white. Alright, and then let's change the font size and make it larger with 19 pixels. Okay, and then let's add some padding. So we'll say padding 7 pixels top bottom and 14 pixels left right. And then let's change the border radius to match the input sections and our user image with 5 pixels. Alright, and then we have that border at the bottom. So let's say border bottom 4 pixels solid 219882. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, except for we want to add the hover style, and then we'll create some space in between the login text and the actual icon. Okay, so let's drop down and we'll say .btn:hover, comma, .btn:focus. Okay, and then let's change the background color to hex value 25A890, which is a darker shade of that green. Okay. And then let's say border bottom 4 pixels solid, and then we'll just use the same hex value so we're not seeing any border on hover, but it stays the same size. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have it looking good on hover. And I'm also going to add an important style here, just in case with the Bootstrap button there. Okay, so let's move on to our icon. So we'll need to get the class to reference this icon to change the padding around it. So that's going to be svg-inline-fa. Okay, so we can take out the stuff at the beginning here. And then let's change the font size of it to 20 pixels. Okay, and then let's add some margin to it to separate it from the login text. So we'll say margin right 7 pixels. Okay, so that's looking good. Just like the original until we get down to the forgot password text. So let's go ahead and we'll want to reference the class that we added for the forgot password text. So that's going to be the forgot class right here. So .forgot, and let's add some padding to it. So padding 5 pixels top, 0 left right, and 25 pixels bottom. Okay, so there we have our spacing laid out, and lastly, let's change the color of our link. So this is going to match the blue sky in the background. So that's the hex value C2FBFE. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, it should match the original. But the only difference that I'm seeing when we toggle back and forth is going to be the box shadow underneath the user image. So let's change the hex value to the same color as the background of our modal content here for the user image box shadow. Okay, so there we have it. Matching the original exactly, and we can't tell the difference when we toggle back and forth. Okay, so that does it for the tutorial. I want to thank you for sticking around with me. Please remember to like this video, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. Then I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.